Hi, how's it going? Welcome to the channel. Zach D Productions here, and I'm here for another throwback list video for you guys. Now, for this list, I'll be going over, in my opinion, some of the best rock and metal albums of the year 1987. Now, I thought 1987 was a pretty good year for music. Now, I will say that I do think that there has been much stronger years of the 80s decade for rock and metal, but 1987 wasn't all bad, though. I do got about 5 albums here, so with that being said, this list is in no particular order. Let's go ahead and begin. And I think the first album we'll talk about is from the band Anthrax, legendary heavy metal band, of course, and thrash, and the big four, obviously, of thrash. And I know some people make debates on whether or not this band deserves to be in the big four or not. For me, I don't really care, to be honest. I mean, if you wanted to replace this band with a band like Death Angel or Overkill in the Big Four, I don't see an issue with that, but I also don't have an issue with them being in the Big Four as well, because they are a very good band, for sure. And of course, the album that Anthrax released in 1987 is their classic album, Among the Living, which I know some people say is one of their best, if not their best, and I would definitely agree. This is probably my favorite Anthrax album. I mean, of course, you do got some of their best tracks on here, like the title track, Caught in a Mosh, A Skeleton in the Closet, and One World. All strong tracks, of course. And this does have some of their best work. And if you are an Anthrax fan, there is a good chance that this album is within the top 3 of your favorite Anthrax albums. And for good reason, of course. But yeah, definitely a really good album and a classic. So, Among the Living by Anthrax. The next album I want to talk about is by Black Sabbath, an essential heavy metal band, of course. Definitely a band that I think every metalhead should check out eventually, if you haven't checked them out already, of course. So the album that Black Sabbath released in 1987 is with Tony Martin, and the album is Eternal Idol. I know that this album is kind of seen as a hit-or-miss album for some people. There's people that really like it, and then there's people that don't like it. For me, I actually kind of like the album, and the Tony Martin era is pretty good, I'd say. Now, I still definitely prefer the Ozzy era of Black Sabbath. I mean, I think Ozzy is the best Black Sabbath singer. Obviously, that's the most iconic era, the most legendary era, and just the most original era, for sure. But this album, Eternal Idol, it's pretty strong, I'd say. I mean, it's not one of their best, of course, but it is pretty good, though. I mean, you got The Shining, you got Lost Forever. The title track is kind of interesting, kind of dark sounding. I mean, there are some very good songs on this album, and it is kind of an overlooked album, I'd say. So, Eternal Idol by Black Sabbath. So, the next album up is by Def Leppard, legendary band, of course. I don't know if you want to call them rock or metal. This is kind of a tough one for me. This is one of those bands where I've honestly struggled trying to figure out if this band is rock or metal, because I've heard debates on both, really. Like, they are part of the new wave of British heavy metal movement, and then, you know, there's also people that say that they're just a hard rock band, you know, a pop rock band, or whatever you want to say about them, but I don't know, it's one of those cases where I've always just really struggled to figure out what genre they're really in. But either way, legendary band and a great band for sure. And the album that Def Leppard released in 1987 is their album Hysteria. This is the album where they really gained a lot of success. Now, they did have some success with the previous album before this one, Pyromania. Now, one thing I do find interesting is Pyromania. It combines the more commercial side of the band in with the more heavier side of the band. In that album, you can tell that Def Leppard were going, I guess, in a more mainstream, more pop-driven direction. Not that they always were, you know, mainstream sounding, but, you know, they really wanted to get on the charts, I guess. And so they came out with this, Hysteria, and this is probably their most mainstream sounding album, their poppiest album, you could say, but I do think that the album is good, and dare I say, I think it's one of their best. I know there's a lot of people that even say that this is their favorite Def Leppard album. It's not my personal favorite, but I would agree that it is one of their best. Maybe top 3 or top 5 at least, but yeah, definitely a really great album. I mean, you got really good songs on here like Rocket, Love Bites, Armageddon It, and the title track. Definitely some very strong tracks on this album, and if you're into 80s rock or metal, check out this album, Hysteria by Def Leppard. Definitely very solid. So the next album up is by the band Aerosmith. Definitely a legendary rock band. Steven Tyler, of course, a legendary frontman. And so the album that Aerosmith released in 1987 is their album, Permanent Vacation. Some people say that this album is overlooked and underrated. I personally really do dig this album. Definitely a great album, not one of their best or anything, but still very strong though. I mean, you do got some very good songs on here like Ragdoll and the classic Dude Looks Like a Lady. Angel's also very good. I mean, you do got some very strong tracks from this album. Yeah, it's not as iconic or as legendary as some of the stuff that Aerosmith did before, like with Rocks or Toys in the Attic or even the debut. But this album is still very solid, and I'd still say it's a classic. So, Permanent Vacation by Aerosmith. And I think Aerosmith is a very good band. Funny enough, they were one of the first bands that I've actually tried to get into. And this was like way back in the day, like back before I even really got into music. But of course, at the time, it didn't really do much for me because, well, you have to remember that I was, immature, when I was young. And I didn't really care about anything from this era, I guess. But I am glad to say that I am a fan of the band. But anyhow, the last album on this list is by the band Rush. Rush, I would say, is one of my favorite bands and one of my favorite prog bands, however you want to say it, of course. But yeah, this album here, they definitely didn't go very proggy that much. This is one of their more commercial, more mainstream sounding albums. And this album does get a lot of heat for that, for sure. But I don't know. I think the album is pretty good. And the album I'm, of course, talking about is Rush's album, Hold Your Fire. There's even people that go as far to say that this is one of their weakest, if not their weakest. I definitely disagree with when people say that this is their weakest. Now, one of their weakest, I think you can make an argument there. The album is definitely not one of their best, though. That's for certain. But the album is still pretty good, I'd say. Rush is one of those bands that don't have any bad albums, so, I mean, you could choose any Rush album, and it'd be good. I mean, if you're looking to check out Rush and you just randomly choose which album you want to start off with, I mean, there's almost no wrong answers. Now, obviously, I would recommend starting with the 70s and early 80s eras of Rush, but honestly, it's like no matter what album you choose, it's going to be a good album, for sure. But Hold Your Fire, yeah, it's not one of their best, but I still do think that there's some very strong tracks from this album. Of course, like Force 10 and Time Stands Still, which is one of their most popular songs. And you know what? There's some songs on this album that I actually do find kind of underrated, such as Open Secrets and Prime Mover. Very good tracks. But yeah, the album, it is a little poppy, more mainstream sounding, but you know what? I still think it's pretty good for what it is. So, Hold Your Fire by Rush. So, there you have it. That is my list for some of my favorite albums of the year 1987. Let me know what you guys think. What are some of your favorite albums of the year 1987? Feel free to let me know. And what do you think of this list here? So with that being said, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.